Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of UnHacked. And I love that name because it's kind of a misnomer on purpose. You can't get unhacked. That's kind of the point of the podcast. So I'm going to do a quick introduction. We'll go ahead and review why we're here, what we're trying to accomplish, and then we're going to dig into the breach of the week. So my name's Justin Shelley. I'm with Master Computing, and I'm here with Bryan and Mario. Will you guys please introduce yourself, starting with Bryan?
Yeah, Bryan Lachapelle with B4 Networks, based out of Niagara region in Ontario, Canada, and we do computer support for small businesses throughout Niagara.
Mario?
Mario Zaki with Mastech. We are a managed service provider in the New Jersey area, servicing the tri-state area with New York and New Jersey.
All right. Like I said, I'm Justin with Master Computing, soon to be Phoenix IT Advisors. I've always hated my company name, and I finally pulled the trigger to change it. So that's worth a longer conversation that doesn't really belong here. But here we go. So UnHacked is a breakdown of real data breaches that we find out there. We want to talk about how they impact real people, how they happened, what we can learn from them so that we can prevent the same damn thing from happening to us. Because here's the problem, guys, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but in our industry, we are charged with protecting all of our clients from the most god-awful thing that can happen to a business, because if somebody gets hacked, not only does it cost a fortune, it can put them out of business, right? Generally speaking, how much of this information is shared with the public or even inside the community on how, the real details of a breach? Do you guys know? Like, when we're going to talk about it today, this is one of our frustrations as we're prepping, right? There's just not that much information out there. So point of the podcast is we're going to get everything that we can. And I think it's pretty safe to say that most of these breaches happen. There's a few ways that they happen. And if we take the recommended measures at preventing them, we can prevent most of them. Fair? Guys have any pushback on that?
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Ironically, if they don't share the information on how the hacks occur, it makes it very difficult for us to learn from them. So we'll dive into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, a little frustrating part of our industry. So let's go ahead and introduce today's topic. And Bryan, we're moving up to Canada today, eh?
Yeah, we're definitely moving into my territory. In fact, it's literally in my backyard. Just last year, the end of the year, around October, November, December, 5 of the local hospitals in the region right next to mine were hacked. These are government-owned hospitals. All 5 of them sharing one local health integration network, and they were breached, which caused everything we're about to discuss. So big organization with big consequences.
And let me put one disclaimer out there to our listening audience and any lawyers who may be listening. We don't know anything. All right, we're reading the news. We're making assumptions, and we're talking about industry best practices, industry standards.
Right.
Because like we said, we don't know, and we're going to talk about what we think may have happened. We're going to talk about what other people think may have happened, but we don't have any true inside information, and we are not trying to say anything bad about the people who were the victims. And I want to remind everybody, these are the victims we're talking about today, not the perpetrators. Those assholes, by the way, we'll talk about that more, but they're hidden. They're behind cryptocurrency. They hide behind that. So they're hidden behind government institutions sometimes. It's ugly trying to trace them down. So all we're really left to do is talk about the victims, and that sucks. But here we are. So in no way, shape, or form am I, or is Bryan or Mario saying anything negative about the victims of this crime, which is the hospital system, the government that runs them, and the patients that are a part of it. Okay. So with that disclaimer, sick patients. Yeah, I mean, like, this is life and death, literally life and death. And we've got people out there taking advantage of it for a few bucks. Well, a lot of bucks. Spoiler alert, they didn't get paid this time. So, all right, Bryan, since this is in your neck of the woods, tell me, give me just a couple of points to work with on what was the actual impact. So it wasn't your hospital that you would have to go to in an emergency. Is that correct?
No, I'm in a region right next door, so we're part of the Niagara region local health integration network. This is the Southern Ontario local health integration network, so it's just like almost next door. I could drive there in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and
Okay.
be over there. And so, some of the impacts of this is that the staff, the hospital, they were unable to access any of the critical information that they needed access to, patient records and appointments. In fact, they had to cancel well over 3,000, I think it's 3,000, no, 20,000 patients. Sorry, my apologies. 20,000 patients had their appointments canceled across the 5 hospitals. And some of these people could have had, and I'm just guessing here, but surgeries or life altering um, procedures that needed to be done and weren't able to have them done. And it's not like you can just drive to the next hospital over. Like that's the entire region. They would have had to come into my neck of the woods.
Hospital got
Uh,
hacked too, right?
well, yeah, all the
They're
5 of
all
them in that
hacked.
whole
Yeah.
area got hacked because they're all together, which means that they could certainly go to other regions within Ontario, but they've got their own backlog, and there's no way they could have handled all those patients.
Yeah. I mean, we've
Yeah,
got
no,
real
imagine
consequences. Go ahead, Mario.
20,000 patients now trying to travel, an hour and a
Yeah.
half, 2 hours out of the area. And those would be essentially like emergency room patients actually that would be traveling, people that broke their arm, people, with chest pains and stuff like that. You can't, the patients that cannot move somewhere else, like a surgery or people, waiting for their chemotherapy or radiation, you can't just go to another hospital and say, hey, I'm here for my daily radiation. Like you have to speak to your oncologist, they have to put you on a special plan and all that stuff. All that stuff is documented in your chart that is not now available to anybody because everything's now locked down and encrypted. So they can't even look up your dosage and see what kind of medicine you need for that day or kind of radiation you need for that day.
Right.
Well, and I'm going to skip around a little bit, Mario, but you talk like you might have a little inside information on how the hospitals work. Because I'm an IT guy, and I don't know anything about what you're talking about. I mean, common sense, but you got a little inside scoop there, maybe, huh?
Well, yeah, my wife works as a lead PA in a hospital in New York, and when we decided that we were going to have this as our topic for our podcast, I kind of interviewed her and asked her some questions. She actually told me to look up to watch like some episode. I forgot on what show, but she essentially told me that even though her hospital has never been hacked with something like this, there has been times where the entire infrastructure, the entire IT has been down, and it just completely becomes a nightmare for the entire staff to look up charts or even to document charts. The nurses are not able to go to what she calls, what they call the pick system, and dispense like medicine just for, being just in the emergency room. There are, sometimes also when you want to dispense a medicine, you're not even able to see if that medicine is conflicting with another medication that you're on. And she was telling me like, there's times where they had to turn patients away, or even they're only able to limit to what they can do. The broken arms, the
Yeah.
the doing EKGs and stuff like that. But even then, sometimes all those other systems are networked to their main infrastructure, and even basic stuff like monitoring and stuff like that, they weren't able to be used. And they have to reschedule whatever they can, and waiting rooms backed up like 4 or 5, 6 hours at a time.
Crazy stuff. I've got a kind of a former client, but we help them with radiology implementation. We get the system up and running, and then uh, it would go down. There was major problems with the manufacturer, but yeah, we had patients who were coming in for cancer treatment, like you're talking about, and they want their results or they want their next treatment, and they can't get them. And this is again not a breach, but still, when you can't get access to that information, there's a life and death toll in play. There's a huge emotional cost, and then speaking to the hospital, their perspective, 20,000 appointments like that. that's money, and people love to complain these days about businesses who want to make money. But I'm sorry, if you're not making money, you're not a business. And if the hospital's not there, they can't treat you. So that's another real significant factor here is the cost, the emotional, the physical, the health cost, and the financial cost is just devastating for something
Yeah.
like this. So
In this particular case, these hospitals don't run as a business because they are government owned, um, right? It's all paid for the most part, but they still would have to pay all those doctors and all of the staff to continue to pay them even though they're not working, which means there was still a significant cost on the organization as a whole. And then you still got to catch up on all of those procedures at
well,
some
that's
point or
yeah.
another, paying
Well, and the
overtime to do
money's
them all, right?
people think that because the government's paying for it, that it's an
Well, it's
endless
our
pool of
money.
money. But right? I mean, that money's got to come from somewhere
Yeah,
eventually. So
exactly.
the
Yeah,
cost, the financial cost, is very real and very significant,
absolutely.
whether it's a government or private. And I know none of us really.
Yeah. In this
Yeah,
Well,
particular
public say
case,
don't care about the government, but
yeah,
yeah,
in
yeah.
this particular
So
case, there was approximately 267,000 patient information leaked, which, some of them had to get some sort of credit monitoring done. That was one of the things they were talking about in the news, about how they're paying for credit monitoring. Now, I'm not going to assume all 267,000 people were, but let's just say they were. That's millions and millions of dollars just to pay for credit monitoring for those folks, right? And then there was, of course, over 3,000 staff members that had their information leaked. Who wants to work for a company that doesn't necessarily treat their information, with the utmost care? And again, I'm not blaming the hospital or the hospital staff, but the perception in the public, and you alluded to this, Justin, the perception in the public is always to blame the victim in this particular case, right? Cyber attacks, they always look at the victim and blame them and say, like, well, you could have done more, you could have done this, you could have done that. And in some cases they can, but the reality is that they're not entirely the ones to blame, the criminals are, but from the public perception, they're the ones who are going to get blamed.
yeah,
So
and we are just to be fair, we are going to come back and we're going to poke at them a little bit, right? Because that's what we
yeah,
do. With the disclaimer that I'll say again, we don't have any inside information, but we will
no,
talk about what should be done in all cases, what we can kind of guess at what probably was part of the cause here. Um, but yeah, so we'll come back to that. We'll dive into that a little bit more. What else as far as hospital impact or patient impact do we have? We caught everything, or did we miss some?
well,
well,
I
there's
believe.
now. Oh, go ahead, Mario. Yeah.
Sorry, I believe. Brian, correct me if I was wrong. They were down for over a week, right?
A lot longer than a week, to my knowledge. It was a couple weeks. Now they were able to recover and some systems and be able to continue servicing the general public for certain items, but by and large, from my understanding, they decided, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, to rebuild the entire system from scratch, which means there's obviously a lot that they were not able to access.
Mm.
So how long? I don't even think they're fully
Well,
up
they're
and
still
running now.
rebuilding. I'll tell you that. Yeah, if they
Yeah,
rebuilt from scratch, they're still rebuilding. You
yeah,
don't do that in a few weeks
right.
or even months.
But
But
Which
here's a little tidbit. There's a class action lawsuit now for 480 million, alleging that the cyber criminals, or sorry, the hospitals didn't do enough to protect the data. And so even if they weren't to blame, there's this like looming lawsuit on them. And if you were a private corporation or private entity, you're on a hook for that, right? There is no insurance that's going to cover $480 million worth of a lawsuit, right? So food for
which is
thought.
sad because that, like, since it is a government facility, who's going to be paying that $500 million? It's going to be the taxpayers. That's all.
Yep.
Taxes are going to go higher, and all of a sudden now everybody that's suing is now going to actually be paying for it. So it's kind of crazy, if you ask me.
That's a good point. Just yeah.
Like you're pretty essentially paying for the lawsuit yourself if this
I
is
mean, yeah,
paid
you're
through by taxes.
spreading it among more people, but
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
pretty solid point. That's kind of funny. Okay, so let's kind of transition into and let's poke a little bit and see if we can figure out what happened, or at least what lessons we can learn. Because again, we're just here trying to figure out how to make this not happen to us, right? Not happen again. If we can learn something, than we want to. So we've already talked about it being 5 hospitals were attacked, and my understanding, and Brian, you're the expert on this case, this was a ransomware attack. They come in, they hold money. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a airtime here. In like 3 sentences or less, define a ransomware attack. What is that?
A group of criminals that go in and either extract or encrypt your data and request for money.
And if I've never been a victim of a ransomware attack, I walk into my office, my company's been ransomed. I turn on my computer and somebody's holding a gun. Like what does it mean? What do they see? What's the experience?
So essentially, you're not going to be able to open up any of your data, your programs, your documents, or anything. You walk in, a lot of times they have like this bright red, background on there that's in a Word document or a notepad document that's open that says we've encrypted all your data. If you want to, see it again, you have to give us X amount of Bitcoins, sent to this untraceable, link. And once we receive it, we'll give you a code that will let you unencrypt your data. Now, when that happens, it's a 50-50 shot if they're going to give it to you or not. If they're going to give you the code to unencrypt your data. They can, because they have your money at that point.
There's no honor in criminals.
Yeah, exactly.
No, hold on right there. In my in-depth research into this industry, there actually is a code amongst criminals because
I heard this.
Well, hear me. This is a business. If they gain the reputation that you pay them millions of dollars that they're asking for and they don't deliver, you think anybody else is going to pay? So you're goddamn right they deliver. And I don't know what the statistics are. I'm guessing you made up the 50-50 because I think it's quite a bit higher than that. And what I also know is that they have support lines. If they can't unencrypt, they go into whoever wrote the software and they're like, hey, help me out. We've got a customer emergency here. They do want you back up and running because not just for their reputation, but now you're a repeat customer. You've raised your hand and said, hey, I have weak security and I have money.
Yeah.
That is true. So that is very
true. It's cheaper to repeat business with a customer than it is to go find a new one. So of course they want to pay. They want you to pay, and they want to deliver amazing customer service. These are good guys. Come on.
The other component here that was missed is a lot of business owners out there will say this, and I've heard it said to me many times. Say, well, I don't really care if I get my data back. I'm backing it up, and even if I don't get it back, who cares? Right. It's not that important to me. Well, the rebuttal of that is these criminals have caught on wind of that as well, and now they don't just not give you your information back. They might release it to the public through a data dump, and now that information, you might not care about it, but your customers, your patients, your the people that the data pertains to, they might care, and they might be extremely upset by the fact that you have now been compromised, and their data was released because of your actions or lack thereof. So it's important to note that yes, there's a ransom, pay me or you don't get your data back, but it's pay me or you don't get your data back and we'll release it to the public, right?
It's some sort of they want to embarrass. It's extortion, right? No matter how they frame it, it's some version of extortion. It's reputation. It's the ability to operate, because even if you can restore that process, like we've talked about, what's the process to restore an entire network from backup? Good luck.
Very expensive.
And we're assuming that all the backups are working flawlessly. How many times when you go to restore from backup, I want you to both throw out a number, percentage of times, and not yours, because I don't want you to point, don't give yourselves away. But when you go into a prospective client and you say, okay, let's test your backups, how often do they work?
Prospective clients?
Prospective clients.
It might be a shot in the dark, like 50-50. If they were looking at their log files and they say that they're working, if they're not looking at their log files, then in most cases I find that it hasn't been running or hasn't been working at all, or it has been working, but not everything was covered as part of that backup. So,
yeah, exactly. Mario? Sometimes they think the whole thing was being backed up, but it was only backing up a certain partition or certain folder, and it wasn't backing up the whole thing. Yeah, I would tend to agree with Brian. I would say about 50 to 60% of the time it's working.
I'm at 0%. I have never had a customer or a prospective customer come in or a new customer come in and say, hey, I've had system failure. Here's my backups. Help me. I've never had that work in 25 years of doing IT work. I've never had it work once. Now, to be fair, I don't get a lot of those, right? That's not a daily thing. It's happened a handful of times, but not once has it been successful.
Yeah, in most
Yeah.
cases, they're backing up the files, but they're not actually backing up the operating
Right.
system, which means that, it's still going to take weeks or months to be able to reinstall everything from scratch, reinstall the software, reconfigure it, and then restore the data. So,
But also
like,
keep in mind, restoring that data, you may just piss off the criminals more because they probably already have a back door, or you actually backed up
Right.
and restored whatever way they came in from. And I've seen it where this is not one of my customers, this was somebody I knew. They actually wiped everything out, restored from backup. 3 days later, they got hit again by the same group, and the ransom got doubled because they knew that they tried they tried they thought the backup was going to be safe and whatever, and they move on with their day. 3 days later, they got hit again.
Yeah, that I think I've already said it on here, but that's what switched my brain from I'm a computer repair shop to no, I'm fighting cybercrime. Was a client got breached on my watch. We did restore from backup. Before I even drove back to the office, they were encrypted again. We kept going back farther and farther on the timeline with the backups until we finally realized they've been on here for a long time, and we did end up rebuilding from scratch a network of 15 computers, and I have no idea how many are in this hospital system, probably just a touch more than 15. It took us 3 weeks to rebuild a network of 15 computers with 3 technicians. Good luck, guys, on this hospital rebuild.
You want to know a really funny story? We once had somebody call us in because they got ransomwared, and we go in there and they had backups. So we take a look at the backups, we find a backup, we restore it, and oddly enough, there was still encrypted data. So we look at it; it's not the same encryption. And then we go back further in the timeline, and they had another encryption, and we're thinking like, geez, what's going on here? They were encrypted. Then another virus came in and encrypted them, and then another virus came in and encrypted them a third time. They had 3 levels of encryption before they even and apparently they didn't access this data very often, thankfully. But 3 levels of encryption, 3 different groups encrypting their information one after the other, like weeks apart, and they didn't notice until then. And we let them know, like, there's not much we can do here. We can go back all the way to when the original one was done, but if you've been backing up over top of the old stuff, like, you're overwriting all that good stuff with all the bad stuff, right? So
how do you get encrypted at 3 levels? Like what are they clicking on? What are these guys?
Okay, exactly. That's what I want to take this as a transition.
Yes,
this is a segue to what are we doing wrong, because I do try to be pretty fair to the people who get breached. They are victims. However, Brian, the one you just cited, like, come on.
Okay, so I could tell you the story. This particular organization had a server, and the owner's son had access because he's the local guru in the family, and he was running a Bitcoin mining farm on the server using pirated software. And of course, when you're doing stuff that's not necessarily legal, not that Bitcoining mining is illegal, but doing it on somebody's network, corporate network, that's, even if it's your parent or somebody I'm pretty sure they weren't intending for them to do that, right? And so that somehow allowed other bad actors to get in because they were using software that wasn't vetted. It was just software that was put out there by the public or by somebody online. And it was like, hey, this software looks good, I'm going to use that to mine Bitcoin. And next thing you know, bad actors had access to it multiple times in different ways. So yeah.
So is it fair to say that any so-called IT expert could have looked at that scenario and identified it as not a best practice?
I think that's safe to say.
Oh, yes. Anybody's worth their they would not they would not have approved.
So let's talk about best practices And let's start throwing some theories around what happened at this hospital. What we know a couple of things that really are conjecture by somebody else. But let's look at what probably or possibly happened here for the bad guys to get in.
Sure. Yeah, I
Anybody
can
want to take
dive
that,
in
Brian?
there. Just the first part there, how we suspect, because I did read up on this a little bit, and according to a couple of experts, I won't mention names. You can certainly look through news articles if you're really interested. But according to a couple, or one of the experts anyway, it's possible that the hospitals, and he's worked with hospitals in the past, avoided installing updates because they're 24/7. So they avoided installing security updates to prevent any kind of system downtime because they're 24 hours a day. They didn't want to risk that. And he says he's encountered hospitals that hadn't installed security patches for years after they were released, right? So we all know that any software made by human beings is flawed, and they're constantly being updated by the software developers because they're constantly finding holes and bugs. I couldn't imagine having systems with no security updates for years. I mean, you toss one of those suckers anywhere and it'll get infected within a matter of minutes.
They're called security updates for a reason. There's
Yeah.
obviously somebody identified that there's an issue with whatever program out there, and they're releasing a security update. So, it's bad when you don't install a security update, beyond like a week or two. But when you go for years, that is a little
So this reminds me
negligent.
a lot of WannaCry. You guys remember WannaCry?
I do, yeah.
That
Mhm.
was huge, and I this is listen, this is like 7 years ago, and I'm an old man and I don't remember stuff the way I used to. But
It was 1 year. I
to
know where
my
you're going.
knowledge,
1 year.
well, but that the patch had been out for a year,
The
right?
patch had been out for over a year
Yeah,
before it was released, and then
yeah,
millions and millions of people were infected. That means millions and millions of people didn't install patches for over a year. Ugh.
right. Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one key takeaway. Again, we don't know that that's what happened here, but
No.
we know that it is a problem. We know that, and by the way, I'll come to their defense a little bit. When you do have an operation that runs 24/7, and you, as the IT guy who's been charged with the security of your whole network because it's your job, and your boss just says do it, and then you go to your boss and say, hey, in order to make the place secure, I've got to take your servers down overnight, and they're like, no, you can't do that. Okay, so now what, right? And whose job is it? Who gets the ultimate say, and who's ultimately responsible? And especially when you've got uh, large organizations, when you've got government, aka politics. Um, I mean, it sounds simple, just patch your stuff, but it really isn't always that simple, right?
Yeah, I mean, for the
Thoughts?
same things that we mentioned earlier, when the system is down, what happens? Waiting room builds up, you can't do, charts, you can't do dispense. So that's why they're hesitant to bring the system down. But at least they're bringing it down in a controlled environment. The reason
True.
they're doing it, and with a conversation with my wife, it happens. Like, it doesn't happen on a weekly basis, but every couple months they will schedule, say, hey, on Tuesday, they try to pick the slowest time. Like usually in middle of the week, where it's not it's not a weekend, it's the middle of the week, in the middle of the night,
Not a full
or
moon.
from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. The system will be unavailable while we do some routine maintenance. Everybody has heard those words before. It needs to be done. If it's once every 3 months or once every 6 months, it needs to be done. And then not
Now,
even just at the hospital level, even local. Smaller businesses need to do something like that.
real quick, all the IT guys in the room who have applied a patch to a server and had that server not come back online, raise your hand.
Yes, yes, yes.
And for those who aren't looking at video, that's all of us. So again, this I just want to make sure we're looking at all angles of this, because I don't want to make anybody the villain. We can point at the IT guys who didn't do their job right. We can point at the administrators who are, looking at a different agenda. All of these things weigh into decisions that are made, and sometimes those decisions work. It's like trying to, armchair quarterback, right? You're looking at the replay. and saying, well, I would have done
Mhm.
this. Well, of course you would have, because you have like you have the proverbial crystal ball right now. But the ones making these decisions, they don't always. We assume bad things aren't going to happen, right? That's really the problem here. So, okay, that high horse. I'm gonna step down off the soapbox. Go on, Brian. What else we got here?
Well, we were going to talk a little bit about, because we don't know exactly what happened and this information wasn't released. And I'm going to go into my own little soapbox here. When information isn't being released on how a hack occurred, right? And I'm going to say this gently. These are doctors, like maybe not the people running the organization, but like, in a medical environment, when an accident occurs, when a problem occurs, they do a form of debrief to identify what went wrong and what could we change to make sure it never happens again. And then they release that information to the wider medical community so that all doctors can learn from that mistake and they don't have to make the same mistake. In this case here, we have no idea what happened, how it happened, how they got in, how they were able to infiltrate, what are the ins and outs. And so as IT providers, we have no idea how to protect for that type of attack specifically because nobody's sharing that information. And in a lot of cases, they don't share the information because they're afraid of being looked at as incompetent. Well, it's even more incompetent not to share that information, right? We need to know what other people are doing and missing so that we can all learn.
Let me clarify just a little bit so that we don't look
Sorry.
too stupid here. When you say we have no idea, I'm going to rein that in, and I'm going to
All
say
right.
that.
Right.
Well, let me finish. You said all the things I would have said, but as I'm listening to it, we have a really good idea, but in the moment, and this is kind of what I set you up for failure saying, in the
Right.
moment we don't know. With all the intricate details of every situation, we don't have any idea. But what we want to take away from this is we can, in almost every one of these breaches, there are similarities that we can take those. We call them industry standards, best practices, whatever, and we can put those in place, and we can stop almost all of these attacks.
Correct.
Almost all of them, right?
And if I could add something to what you guys are saying, in our episode 8, we went over the MGM breach, and we
Yeah.
learned that the way that breach happened wasn't a typical breach. It was a hacker
Right.
that called the help desk, and then the help desk person then
True
let the
social
hacker
engineering.
in. Yeah. Now that is not a typical everyday hack, but what we learned because they released how it happened, we learned like, listen, as IT experts, we need to take certain precautions. We need to make sure when somebody calls in the help desk and asks for a password reset, if you're not 100% sure who this person is because you have not spoken to him before, you need to take these proper precautions. You need to either hang up with them and call the office back, dial his extension, make sure he picks up, or if you have, the cell phone on file, you text them the code and stuff like that. There's certain things that we've learned from the way the breach happened that we then pivot accordingly. In this situation, they didn't release how it happened. So as experts, we're going to do an educated guess of how we thought something like this can typically happen. Correct?
Yeah. Correct. We do know a couple of things. So what we do know is that the group that allegedly attacked them and got into their system were in there for a week before launching the attack, and that their claims, and again, this is the criminals' claims, so take it for what it is, they claim that a lot of the passwords were similar across all of the systems, which made them vulnerable. And from their perspective, it was once they got in, the network is almost completely transparent. They can go pretty much anywhere and anywhere on that system. So we do know those things, but we can take educated guesses, and I'll refer back to my colleagues here to go over some of those educated guesses as to how it could have happened.
Real quick on that information that you just shared. Where did we get that from? What's your
It was
source on
from a
it?
news article. It was CBC, a CBC news article. I can certainly give you the link to share.
Well, no, and
if you'd like.
I'm just curious. The hackers are claiming this. How do we know? Do they publicly?
They
Are they
came
just trying to
forward.
humiliate? And they're like, "Hey, it was me. I did it, and here's how I did it." Is that
Yeah.
that
So
what you're
this
saying?
particular group came forward, and I won't mention their name because a lot of these people love the kudos and they love the
Yeah.
attention. So this particular group came forward and took they admitted it was them. Now, whether it was them or not, and they were just looking for, the glorification or whatever, but they claim it was them, and we have no reason to believe otherwise. That they're the ones who took over the system, and then that's what they released to the public. Why? I have no idea. Again, they love to
like the
brag.
attention, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mario, were you going to say something?
No, I was pretty much just gonna clarify, like by having that same password on multiple systems, it's equivalent to like having a master key in an apartment building. Like the super. If his key can open up multiple apartments, he can go anywhere. And by going anywhere in that building or on that network, they get free range to do whatever they want.
Well, and so this is a great example of, I'm constantly referring to best practices, right? Best practices, you do not share passwords, right? And that sounds great on paper until you're an overworked, undertrained, underpaid, no vacation schmuck who's responsible for security because your boss just came to you one day and said, "Oh, by the way, I don't want to ever get hacked. Make that happen," right? So the reality of having a unique password on a local admin password on each workstation without a tool to do it manually, somebody take that on. How realistic is that, Brian? Mario?
Oh, not unless you have a tool that will help you do it. It's difficult. We do, but if you don't,
Yeah.
you're not doing it.
Yeah, short of having a tool to automate it. But
Yeah, you won't be able to unless like you come up with your own like way of either putting a sticker like a number on the computer and having a combination of different things, or just walking around with a big Excel sheet. Like you're really not going to be able to create a unique password for all systems, especially thousands of computers across 5 different hospitals.
There are tools that are available for it.
There are, which is why I specified without a tool.
Yeah, that will document the passwords as well. But then the dichotomy there is that password or that tool
Keys are the key.
now becomes a security risk. So then you have to make sure that's locked down really, really well.
There's no perfect solution. There's no perfect solution, right? We can agree on that. This is all a matter of making a best effort, not being the low-hanging fruit, whatever. And the reason I kind of make this point, one of the things that's the most frustrating to me when I'm working with prospects is, and I just had the conversation this morning with a guy who is the IT for his company of 50 employees, so not a huge company, but big enough company. And he's the director of IT, which is his title. He's also like everything else in that company. He wears 100 different hats, and he's looking. God bless him, because he's looking for help to not have to do this anymore. But right now, today, holy shit! If I go into that network and do an audit, it's going to be a mess, right? Because one guy who's wearing multiple hats without all the tools that we're talking about, it can't be done. This is not a DIY scenario, right? For everybody listening, if you're the guy and you don't have specialized training and specialized tools, get out, like go work somewhere else, because somebody's going to point the finger at you. We're talking about lawsuits here. Who all is going to be named in that lawsuit? I mean, we don't know, but we can sure guess. And it'll be the guys at the top, but it's also going to be the people who were responsible, even if it's just on paper, to do this stuff. Even if they weren't given the budget, even if they weren't given the resources to do it, if it's their job, somebody's coming after them, right? So,
if I could add something, we have those tools and we've locked them down, but it's, and I'm sure you guys, as well as us, we have multiple layers to those tools. Like, our tool set, you can log into our system unless you're using our our IP address in our building or VPN into our building and use it. Like if somebody's from the outside tries to log into our RMM, you can't use it. So not only do you have to have the tools and you have to have it protected, but you have to have different layers protecting those things too. Once you log in, you need two-factor authentication. So now you need a VPN, you need the username, you need the password, and then you need to also have the two-factor authentication. So there's multiple layers.
I like to tell my clients and my employees that if security isn't a giant pain in your ass, it's not being done right. And it sucks, but I'm just telling you, if it is not a pain in your ass, then you are about to have some problems. So
Yeah.
deal with the small problem now of the 2FA, multi-factor authentication that you just mentioned, and various other things that we have to do, hoops we have to jump through. But we always want to be in compliance with the best practices, right? So what else do we have, Brian, as far as the reasons, the how this happened?
Well, we don't have anything else. The only thing we can do now is just, go through likely scenarios. So I'll go through a couple of them, and then maybe you guys can, jump in with some of your knowledge. Likely could be maybe social engineering. Maybe they reached out to somebody at the hospital who was in the service department. We don't know. They may have just known an employee at the place and were able to hack their password. Maybe they saved the password on some website somewhere. Two very likely scenarios. Email, maybe.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier. Like, I know I've visited, relatives that were in the hospital, and we're sitting there and next to their bed, and the nurse comes in to look up something in their chart or give them medicine, and they log into the computer. At least hospitals by me, there's a computer in every room, and
Mm-hmm.
they have in the system where it would automatically lock them out after, say, 5 minutes if they're idle. But I've seen, I saw with my own eyes, the nurse will come in, log in, do whatever she needs to do, and then she just walked away and left the computer unguarded for the before it locked. Now, obviously, I wouldn't do something like that, but if somebody is malicious and or knows something, maybe there's a award, or reward for doing this. They could have put in a USB key into that computer and gave the hackers access right there.
Yeah, and I'll pivot on. Well, I'm going to go off of that and say that one of the best things, one of the most important things that we can do in the world of security is educate our users, because no matter what we put into place in the technology, all it takes is one silly mistake like that to undo everything,
Doesn't
right?
even have to be malicious either. They could be,
Right,
oops, I didn't realize it.
right. So that ongoing education is critical. It's boring as hell. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody has time for it. But we also don't have time for these massive breaches either, right? So
You have time to do it once, but not twice.
yeah, or I've heard it said, "Well, there's never time to do it right, but always time to do it over." So
Yeah.
take a minute and educate your people. And then culture is another thing that I like to talk about. Is if we have to not just force security on people, but reward them for it. Find a way to make this something that is there's a carrot versus a stick. Use a stick if you have to, but find ways to reward, to acknowledge. Hey, I don't care. Give them a Starbucks gift card every time they say, "Hey, I saw this little thing that could be a problem." But find a way to get that information from the front line up to the ones who are making the decisions, so that they have more information to work with. So, what else do we have as far as? I mean, we kind of went over likely scenarios. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to talk about there?
I think we've covered
just
most of it.
mistakes happen. People, it could have been just a click in an email. It happens,
Yeah,
and it could have been somebody that they know that got breached, and the email looks like it's from a legitimate source, and they click on something. It could have been somebody in the HR department that received an email like, "Please see my attached termination papers," or something. If they click on it, because it looked legitimate, the important thing is to have the tools in place in case somebody actually does make a mistake. Like, you don't want to take down an entire infrastructure with one click. So if somebody does accidentally click, you want to have those security tools thereafter that can stop it. Like,
right.
lock down the computer, have a security operations center monitoring and shut down that system or isolate it. You can't, educating is the first step. You're 90% there if you educate your employees, but the other 10% is what happens if they do
Sure.
click or
Yeah.
they do whatever. So it's there's multiple layers, and we tell our customers all the time, we don't take security. We don't just put one tool in place. We stack them up. It's an entire security stack. This happens, then what's the next level? What's the next level? What's the next level? Last resort is to restore from backup.
Well, on top of that, Mario, is so number one, you're right, it's multi-layered. We have to hit this from multiple angles. And number two, the approach changes all the time.
Mhm.
My security stack today, my tool set today is completely different than it was a few years ago.
Sure is.
And it might change on a quarterly basis. It sure changes on an annual basis. And so, back to my point that this is not a DIY, a do-it-yourself scenario. If you're not living in this world, you've just got you're asking for problems. And my personal reason for doing this podcast is to keep me sharp. So I want to go out. I want to have, on my calendar, I've got to go out and I've got to dig into a breach and I've got to look at it. I'm going to try to figure out what happened. I've got to try to figure out what could have done to prevent it. And I've got to try to figure out how to fix my own shit, by the way, so that
Yeah.
I'm not the one somebody else is breaking down on their podcast, right? Because
Right, right.
if people are going to pay me to protect them, damn, I want to make sure I'm on my game. And so I'm going to pivot now. We're gonna wrap this up. And I'm going to say, like, the number one thing that this hospital could have done, in my opinion, or that anybody could do, that myself included does do, is getting another set of eyes on the security measures. So
Agreed.
I live and breathe this every day. I lose sleep over it every single night. I do this podcast with you guys every single week. I've got, emails coming in with articles. I'm reading, I'm studying, I'm learning. I'm always here. And I still am not convinced I know what I'm doing, right? So I still want somebody else to come in and audit my work and point out my flaws. And that's our offer for everybody listening today. Is the company, we all coincidentally do use a third party to review our own work, right? And I believe we all have because we said this last week, we all have the ability to do that for our clients as well. So
We do.
um, that is the standing offer. It is limited, it takes time, it takes resources. So we don't have these available to everybody. First come, first serve, or at least get in line. But reach out to us and we can put not just our eyes on your network and your security, but we actually get our eyes plus this third party review company that we use to back us up as we're backing you up. The worst thing you can do is not know where your blind spots are.
Yep.
Any final thoughts on that, guys?
You took the words out of my mouth.
No, I completely agree. And we've known each other for a while. We meet each other. We're meeting on a weekly basis, and we're always bouncing, ideas and tools off each other and mentioning different things. So we're constantly learning and adding and learning from each other as well.
Right.
Ironically,
sure.
so are the criminals. I'm sure they're getting together once
Oh,
a
yeah.
week and figuring out how to
Absolutely.
improve their business, quote unquote.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, they're playing for keeps. This isn't a game to them. This is their business. It's their livelihood, and it's disgusting, but it is what they do. And we've got to do better.
Yeah. And these guys are not just like they're not just criminals. They're terrorists. When they're doing stuff like this
Yeah. Oh yeah.
for ill patients, people that could be possibly on their deathbed, they're not just trying to make a couple quick bucks. They're murderers, in my opinion.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. But criminals are, right. We've got a whole correctional system. That's a funny term. Sorry. Um, full of these people who do intentionally harm to get gain, right? And that is what we're doing. We are. I did not go to. It's not called law enforcement school, but criminal justice. I don't have a degree in criminal justice. I did not get into technology because I thought I wanted to fight crime, but here we are.
But here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So guys, take us up on the offer. It can't hurt. Just get somebody else's eyes on your system. We are at the moment giving these away for free. At some point that dries up and we do have to start charging for them. That's first come, first serve. So best way to contact us, you can go to unhacked.live. That website, we'll put all of our contact information on there. But just so it's here on the recording, Mario, then Brian, then I'll go. Let's wrap up with our contact information.
Yeah, so Mario Zaki with masstech.com, or you can reach us at 973-272-2324.
Bryan Lachapelle with B4 Networks. That's the letter B, the number 4, networks with an S.ca. And you can call us at 905-346-4966.
All right, and I'm Justin Shelley, and like I said, my company name's changed in Master Computing, but soon to be Phoenix IT Advisors. Just put a .com on either one of those, and you'll find me. Thanks for joining us, audience. Mario, Brian, always a pleasure. Look forward to a repeat next week. Take care, guys.
Thank you,
so much.
guys.
Bye, everybody.